I'm Ethan Moreau, 20 years old. A year ago, I convinced myself Paris would be my fresh start. A sprawling city of light and motion, where the nights stay lit and everyone is too busy to notice a face in the crowd. I came hoping to dissolve into the noise, to live quietly, so that no one would ask where I'd come from or what I'd tried to hide. But on my first day at the international campus tucked in the Latin Quarter, a name followed me down every corridor. Adrien Delacroix. People shot me warning looks and muttered, "Don't get close to him. He's trouble." Strange, then, that the one name I was determined to avoid became the one that forced me to look up. What began as a shove on the sports field, a moment I thought would pass, slipped into a chain of problems I hadn't foreseen. Adrien moved through my life like a storm, ripping away the quiet I'd come to Paris to keep. I hated him at first. I feared him. Yet in a city that never truly sleeps, I slowly realized I wasn't the only one running. Sometimes the deepest wounds are the very things that pull two strangers toward each other. Part 1. Step into Paris. It began with the sound of footsteps echoing against ancient stone, a rhythm both steady and uncertain, as though each step carried the weight of something unspoken. I remember the air of Paris that morning, sharp, crisp, touched with a faint aroma of roasted chestnuts drifting from a vendor on the corner. The city greeted me not with warmth, but with a kind of restless indifference, as if Paris itself had no time to pause for a stranger arriving with a suitcase full of secrets. The Latin Quarter shimmered in early light. Cobblestones gleamed faintly with dew, and tall facades in pale beige and soft gray leaned over narrow streets like silent guardians. There was music in the distance, not from an instrument, but from the murmur of voices and the shuffle of countless shoes, a low hum that made me feel both invisible and overwhelmed. I thought to myself, perhaps this was the perfect place to disappear. I walked through the gates of the Sorbonne with a quiet determination. My heart beat unevenly, like the soft staccato of rain against glass, reminding me of why I had come here. A new beginning, I told myself. A chance to dry leaves across the hallway. Adrien Delacroix. The syllables curled and lingered, a warning, a lure, a secret dressed as a story. I heard it in French. I heard it in English. I heard it accompanied by the rise of eyebrows and the tightening of lips. "Do not cross him," the voices seemed to say. "Stay away." I did not know him, but his presence was everywhere. Posters from last year's student debates bore his photograph, sharp and unyielding. Rumors ran along the walls like cracks in old paint. Some said he was brilliant, others said he was dangerous. But all agreed on one thing. Adrien was untouchable. It should have been easy to ignore him. Paris was vast, Sorbonne was larger still. I told myself I would not collide with such a storm. But fate has a way of pulling opposites together. The lecture hall for philosophy was wide and solemn, lit by tall windows where sunlight fell in narrow shafts upon rows of wooden desks. The air smelled faintly of dust and ink, the kind of scent that belongs to books older than memory. I slid into a corner seat, grateful for the distance it gave me. My notes were ready, my mind set on silence. Yet silence was not what the morning offered. The professor began to speak, his voice rolling low and deliberate. Ideas filled the room, questions of existence, the meaning of truth, the nature of freedom. I let the rhythm of his words soothe me, like waves brushing ashore. But then, a ripple disturbed the calm. A chair shifted, footsteps crossed the floor, and a new energy entered. Adrien. Even without being told, I would have known. His presence was a current, strong and immediate, pulling the eyes of everyone around him. Tall, with an air of carelessness that seemed deliberate, he moved as though the world bent slightly to make way. His gaze was not fixed on the professor or on the lesson. It drifted, restless, searching, daring. I felt it brush past me once, and the hairs at the back of my neck rose. I tried to shrink further into my seat, but my effort was in vain. As the professor raised a question on destiny and choice, silence first, then growing, a ripple spreading from row to row. Whispers returned, but this time with my name woven into them. I had been pulled into Adrien's orbit without consent, a moth brushed by fire. The quiet life I'd promised myself cracked open like glass under pressure. I left the hall with my pulse echoing louder than the bells of the cathedral down the street. My footsteps clattered along the corridor, yet no sound could drown the truth. By the end of my first morning, Paris already knew my name, and it knew it for the wrong reason. What unsettled me most was not the laughter, nor the eyes that followed, but the look Adrien gave as I turned away. It was not triumph, not even scorn. It was something more complex, something unreadable, as if I had stumbled into a place within him I was never meant to see. And as I stepped back into the courtyard, the sky above Paris heavy with pale clouds, one thought refused to leave me. Why did his gaze feel less like a warning, and more like the beginning of something I could not escape? Part 2. The tension without escape. The library's stillness in the late afternoon felt thick, absorbing every sound, the scent of old paper mixing with the aroma of coffee from a nearby cafe. It was here, amidst the bookshelves and narrow aisles, that I first sensed Adrien's presence again, as if his closeness was something I couldn't escape. My pulse quickened, a soft drumbeat that reminded me nothing in his orbit would ever be simple. The first week in Paris became a delicate dance of glances and avoidance. But Adrien seemed to appear everywhere. Whether I was lost in a book or on the soccer field, his shadow loomed. I would catch glimpses of him, leaning against a shelf, his hair catching the light, always present yet never fully engaging. It felt as though I was caught in a current, unable to resist its pull. Whispers about us began to swirl. Some students claimed I had become an anomaly in Adrien's otherwise untouchable life. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was random, meaningless. But in the quiet of the library, the murmurs turned into a low hum that hummed beneath my skin. Provide some refuge. But even here I felt Adrien's presence in the periphery, always just out of reach. It became harder to control my reactions to him. His pull was undeniable, and the more I tried to escape it, the more intense it became. Then came the moment that would stay with me. On a rooftop, high above the city, I found Adrien standing alone, gazing into the night. His posture was tense, his body rigid against the wind. I stood frozen, my heart racing as I watched him, unsure whether to approach or retreat. But something in me urged me to step closer, to reach out. I moved cautiously, my shoes barely making a sound. And for a brief moment, Adrien turned, his eyes meeting mine with a weight I couldn't name. The city sprawled beneath us, its lights shimmering in the distance. And in that moment, everything else, the fear, the tension, the rumors, seemed small. I hesitated before placing my hand near his arm, an unspoken connection forming between us. The storm in his gaze softened, and I understood that the tension wasn't just external. It was something we both carried, unresolved and heavy. Time seemed to stretch as we stood there, side by side yet apart. Slowly, I guided him back from the edge, not with words, but with quiet understanding. Our hearts beat in rhythm with the city, the pulse of life and uncertainty mixing in the air. We didn't speak, but in that silence, something shifted between us. As we stepped away from the rooftop, The city stretched beneath us, its lights a blur in the distance. The tension between us hadn't dissipated. It had only transformed, lingering. An unspoken bond forged in that moment. The library, the soccer field, the cafes, they felt smaller now. We had shared something, a fragment of the storm that Adrien carried within him. And as I walked beside him, I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, the currents pulling us together were far stronger than I had imagined. Part 3. Secrets of the Dreams. Paris after midnight holds a stillness that seems to pause the city's breath. The streets, slick with rain, stretch empty beneath the distant hum of the metro. Possibilities before they reached reality. One quiet night, I watched Adrien sketch shapes and lines in a notebook, his hands trembling as he tried to capture visions he barely understood. As I looked closer, I saw myself in the pages, not exactly, but as an echo, a shifting presence, sometimes gone, sometimes faltering. The first time it happened, I felt a twisting sensation in my stomach. I saw myself stumble in an alleyway, disappear into shadows, and then reappear in a cafe I'd never been to. Adrien's brow furrowed as he traced the patterns, and I understood that every vision, every dream, carried a palpable tension, as if the air vibrated with apprehension. He feared what might happen, but he could not stop it. Adrien's dreams were fluid, unpredictable. I saw moments where I fell, where the city shifted in impossible ways, and where Adrien's presence both saved and endangered me. The pull of inevitability hummed beneath every image, vibrating in my chest, syncing with my own heartbeat. What unsettled me most wasn't the visions themselves, but the weight they placed on Adrien. He lived with a constant anxiety, trying to control the threads of fate even as they exhausted him. He flinched at small changes, lingered over possibilities that might never come to pass, yet refused to let go. I felt myself caught in a fragile current, swept forward by his uncertainty. Despite this, we grew closer, though we both avoided acknowledging it. In the quiet of his attic, my presence seemed to soothe him, and the city below, with its glowing lights and soft echoes, felt like a fragile refuge. But even in those moments, fear lingered, fear of judgment, of what others might think, keeping our words, our hearts, and our hands apart. I often watched Adrien trace lines in his notebook, shadows falling across his face. The faint creak of the floorboards, the whisper of wind against the window, even the hum of the city, all seemed woven into the fabric of his secret. To witness his world felt both awe-inspiring and unsettling. The visions he saw were too intricate, too delicate to voice aloud. Visions, rendered as a shadow, a silence, a void, and I felt the sharp pang of displacement. In those instances, the world seemed hollow, the streets empty, as if I were a ghost in someone else's tapestry. Adrien's hands would tighten on his notebook, his jaw clenched, and I realized the weight he bore. To glimpse the future, even partially, was a responsibility heavier than most could withstand, yet he carried it with quiet courage. Our lives became a careful dance of proximity and distance. We shared fleeting glances, passed each other on narrow bridges, and lingered in public spaces, each interaction loaded with meaning. The city, with its glowing street lamps, quiet cafes, and Montparnasse rooftops, became a stage for our unspoken exchanges. Beneath the beauty, however, anxiety simmered. Every choice, every glance, could ripple through the threads of fate Adrien so carefully tracked. I learned to walk carefully, listen attentively, and feel without expectation. The attic became a sanctuary where we could breathe quietly together, separated yet intertwined by the delicate threads of the future. But even in this fragile cocoon, the fear of exposure and judgment loomed, stretching long shadows across the moonlit floor. In the quiet aftermath of one dream, as the first light of dawn touched the rooftops and glinted on the Seine like scattered silver, I realized this was only the beginning. The city had revealed part of itself, a world of possibility and fear, intimacy and restraint. Adrien's visions were not just glimpses of what might come, but invitations to step into a current far stronger than either of us could control alone. As I watched Adrien trace the final lines of a dream in his notebook, a thought lingered, delicate yet insistent. If these dreams could shape reality, what future awaited us, together or apart, in a city that held both possibility and peril in its quiet, unwavering gaze? Part 4. The Delacroix Family. The first time I saw the Delacroix estate in Versailles, the gates rose before me like silent sentinels, wrought up that seemed to pull at his every move. The world of the Delacroix family was a stark contrast to the more casual rhythm of university life. Here, laughter was controlled, smiles measured, and every gesture deliberate. The parties were extravagant. Crystal glasses chimed, orchestral music swelled softly, and servants moved like whispers. Every detail conveyed authority, status, and the unspoken rule that nothing here was without purpose. Adrien's gifts mattered to them not as curiosities, but as instruments of influence. His ability to glimpse fragments of the future was something they could weave into their plans for power. I began to see Adrien not as a disruptor of my quiet life, but as a brilliant yet burdened pawn, navigating rules he hadn't chosen. As we walked through the corridors, I sensed the tension of his family's expectations. Conversations, just out of earshot, were thick with subtext, promises, and threats hidden in smiles. I realized that our connection, fragile and still tentative, was an anomaly in this rigid world. Every touch, every lingering glance between Adrien and me became dangerous, a signal that drew unwanted attention. The first warning came subtly, like the faint creak of a floorboard beneath careful footsteps. A glance from Adrien's mother, sharp and assessing, a whispered word to a passing cousin, an unmistakable signal that boundaries existed not only in his family's expectations, but in the fragile space between us. My pulse quickened, a reminder that every heartbeat in the mansion seemed amplified, recorded in a world where carelessness was not tolerated. Despite the grandeur and danger, Adrien and I found fleeting moments of intimacy. In the early mornings, we wandered through quiet halls, the sun casting long shadows across ornate floors. We paused on terraces overlooking manicured gardens, where the rustling leaves and distant birdsong became a gentle backdrop to our private world. In those moments, the tension eased slightly, though we couldn't fully acknowledge the fear threading through our connection. Every touch carried both comfort and risk, as if the air itself held its breath. But the fragility of these moments, I stepped deeper into his world, a world that threatened to sweep me away even as it drew me closer. The dreams became a mirror of the choices we might never make freely. The grandeur of Versailles, the elegance of the mansion, and the subtle rituals of power within the family contrasted sharply with the intimacy we tried to carve for ourselves. Every encounter, every gesture, every fleeting smile was charged with unspoken stakes. The mansion, so beautiful and ordered, was also a cage. Every step within it seems to echo the weight of generations, expectations, and unspoken rules. Through these moments, I began to understand Adrien more fully. The boy who had once seemed untouchable at the Sorbonne was not just confident or reckless, he was trapped, maneuvering through a life preordained by legacy and vision. I saw the fear in his eyes, the tremor beneath his composed exterior, and it resonated with the unease I'd carried since arriving in Paris. Walking together one evening in the gardens, I traced the frost on the leaves, listening to the soft crunch of gravel beneath our shoes. Adrien's hand brushed mine, a fleeting connection that carried more weight than either of us admitted. I felt the pull of possibility and the push of consequence, both delicate and persistent. Our world was small within the vastness of the estate, but every action, every glance was magnified, as if the mansion itself were watching, cataloging, judging. And then the vision returned. I saw myself fading again, not through neglect, but due to forces beyond our control, the expectations, the pressures, the weight of the family's ambitions. Fear rippled through my chest, subtle but undeniable, like a quiet wind disturbing still water. Adrien's gaze met mine, and in that silent exchange, the fragility of our connection and the enormity of what we faced became painfully clear. By nightfall, as the gardens and terraces of Versailles were cloaked in darkness, I understood that our choices were constrained not only by desire, but by circumstance. Adrien's family, with all its elegance and authority, loomed over us like a soft yet unyielding shadow. Every heart distant lilacs, mingling with the quiet murmur of the river as it flowed steadily beneath us. I walked beside Adrien, the fabric of his coat damp against my fingertips. The bridge, wide and majestic, stretched ahead like a threshold between past uncertainty and a future not yet written. The rain blurred the golden glow of the lamps, softening edges and turning the city into a canvas of light and shadow. Each step we took produced a muted crunch, the sound swallowed quickly by the rhythm of rainfall, leaving a delicate hush that made every heartbeat audible, intimate, and profound. Since Versailles, since the attic and the visions that shaped our nights, I had carried a quiet determination. I could not allow myself to be trapped in Adrien's foreseen shadows, those delicate patterns of fate that threatened to erase me from his life. I had to step into the current with courage, not as a passive observer of the world he saw, but as someone who could stand beside him, even if the waves of circumstance tried to sweep us apart. The city seemed to recognize our resolve. The Seine shimmered with the reflection of lamps, the water whispering against the bridge supports, a soft susurration that matched the quiet intensity between us. Adrien's hand lingered near mine, hesitant, as if expecting me to pull away. Yet our shadows merged on the wet stone, elongated and indistinct, dancing in the dim golden light. The tension that had followed us from the attic room to the terraces of Versailles now felt tangible, like an invisible thread tightening and releasing between us. Even in this fragile moment, the pressures from his world were present. His family, with their subtle threats and carefully measured expectations, pressed upon him invisibly. Friends who had once been allies now questioned our connection, the murmurs of disapproval blending with the rain and the river's murmur. Yet in the midst of these currents, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. We had a choice: to be dictated by visions and expectations, or to step into our own rhythm, fragile, but our own. The raindrops clung to Adrien's lashes, tracing soft lines along the curve of his face. I noticed the tension in his shoulders, the quiet exhale he tried to a soft backdrop, leaving only the pulse of shared breaths and the quiet thrum of our hearts. The city's heartbeat became ours, gentle yet persistent, as if Paris itself were holding its breath, waiting for our decision. In the hush of the moment, the visions that had haunted him for months seemed to lose their sharp edges. The threads of foreseen tragedy, the images of absence and loss, softened into possibilities rather than certainties. I sensed Adrien's grip on fear loosening, replaced by the tentative bloom of hope. Each drop of rain seemed to echo the rhythm of choice, the soft pitter-patter, a lullaby, urging courage, resilience, and trust. We walked further along the bridge, side by side, letting the rain soak through our coats, letting the mist of the Seine mingle with the warmth rising between us. Each step was a small rebellion against the invisible lines that had been drawn around us, a gentle insistence that our bond was not to be dictated by visions or authority. The lamps overhead cast halos of gold on the wet surface, and our reflections intertwined in the water, indistinct, fluid, yet inseparable in that moment. Adrien finally exhaled, a sound barely audible, blending with the rain and river's murmur. I felt the tremor of his tension ease, like the soft rustle of leaves after a passing storm. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, yet it carried the weight of transformation. He allowed himself to step fully beside me, our hands finally meeting in a quiet clasp, firm yet gentle, grounding us against the uncertainties of what lay ahead. The bridge itself seemed to mirror our fragile resolve. Arches curved gracefully overhead, reflecting in the rain-slicked stone beneath, as though the city were enclosing us in a private sphere, a sanctuary carved from light, water, and mist. The soft slap of raindrops against stone, the distant hum of the river, and the muted clink of lamplights created a symphony of calm, weaving around our presence and knitting together the frayed edges of our courage. And yet, the world beyond the bridge was still waiting. Family pressures, social fragile, precious, and real. As we lingered on the bridge, the city lights flickering in the rainy haze, one thought remained, suspended like a reflection in the water beneath us. The path ahead was unwritten, and the nights to come held both uncertainty and promise. Yet for the first time, I knew that however fleeting, however delicate, we had chosen to stand together, not dictated by dreams, fears, or external forces, but by a quiet determination and the steadfast tether of shared courage. And as the Seine murmured beneath us and the rain whispered softly across the bridge, I could not help but wonder, in a city of infinite possibilities, what would dawn bring for two hearts daring to step into the storm together?